Alright everyone, it's time for Occult Literature, video number 265, Jacob's Rod. This is a very interesting work because it's actually in two parts. It's 113 pages long, so it's intermediate. Link in the description of this video to my edition of this work on Amazon. Second and third links are to my books blogs. I haven't yet done the blog write-up for these, so I'm not sure which category to put them in. I mean, it's a little bit under mysticism, it's kind of a little bit under homeopathy and thus herbalism, but it's also technically an academic and folkloric work, so it's kind of a hodgepodge of material. The first half of it is actually a translation of a 17th century document by Hilaire, by Baratel, by the actual author of the second half of the work, which is listed as an addendum. So it's in two actual halves, and the first one is more on the mesmeric side of things. It's more a little bit health related at times, but a lot of it is about finding waters and minerals through dowsing, essentially. The use of Jacob's rod, the Y-shaped dowsing rod as you'd call it, not like the modern ones. The New Age dowsing rod is actually two rods, and they're usually roughly L-shaped and made of copper or zinc or some plated material. The idea is to seal up energy vortices that can cause cancer and weird New Age hippie-trippy mumbo-jumbo nonsense like that, which is what it is, you do realize. For anyone out there that does energy dowsing, it's basically a placebo, by my understanding. The more traditional method is to take a piece of hazel that's roughly Y-shaped, and by moving around with it, you can use it in a medicinal context to an extent. That's more in the addendum here. A lot of making passes, hypnotism sort of stuff, because it comes from the early 1900s. The idea was that if you went over your land with the dowsing rod, it would twist or move, or you would feel an energy from it if you were sensitive to it. And you could use this to find water, you could find wells with it, you could find mineral deposits. Now, of course, the reality is that if you're in the right location, if you dig far enough, typically you're going to find water. If you have a basic understanding of gravity and of geology, you could easily fool people with a dowsing rod back then. Most people didn't have a fucking clue. If you did have a clue, you could make your best guess, and more than 50-50 chance you'd find the water. A pretty good chance you'd find the mineral deposit. All they have to do is they see one little piece of silver in that rock that you've just discovered with your dowsing rod. They pay you an inordinate sum of money, number one, refer you to all their friends, number two, and then begin digging. By the time they realize it's only a little ore vein, you've already left town, so to speak. This was common. Joseph Smith used to do things like that. Joseph Smith, founder of Mormonism, one of his shticks was that he would take a little bit of money or something, put it in a box and bury it on someone's land. And then he would say to the townspeople, hey, I can find buried treasure. And then he'd go and pretend to find it. And then they would all pay him money, and he'd say, okay, but I can only do this once a day, so I'll start tomorrow. And then he would ride out of town on his horse with everyone's money, except for this paltry sum that he left to the person. Or he'd have a confederate there to pretend that it was miraculous who would bury it for him. Oh, just look under the three bushes in my backyard. Yeah, there's a box there. I buried it like a week ago, so come do your shtick. Just make sure to pay me my cut. He did this cause. He made quite a bit of money doing that. There's the reason the fucker got shot. Anyway, with dowsing, to be clear from an occult perspective, dowsing in the sense of finding minerals in water, things of that nature, that I personally cast aspersion to. It's been largely discredited over time. There's also really no need for it since everything gets probed with high-tech equipment at this point. Dowsing would be primitive. That being said, the addendum of this work is still very much of interest. It contains a fairly lengthy expose on being poisoned by the resonance of metals, number one. Now, this is really out there stuff even for its era, so keep that in mind. The idea was that if you used metals in dowsing, because the idea was that you would put a piece of the material you were searching for in the dowsing rod or in the wand, whichever you were using, you could get poisoned by its energy, not just by touching it or something like, mercury poisoning or antimonial poisoning, but literally by copper, zinc, and so forth if you did it wrong. And it talked about what you should do as a medicinal sort of treatment for that, which inevitably meant ingesting, by the way, other materials. They were, in some cases, quite toxic. It talks about healing people. Now, we can chalk this up, we can rationalize it and say that people are healed by mesmerism or some similar energy work because of the placebo effect. In some cases, it appears to be a bit more than that. In some cases, it could be literally nothing more than human-to-human interaction in a person who's chronically lonely and thus stressed and depressed. It alleviates that. It alleviates, therefore, certain physical symptoms that are stemming from their mentality, actually. It's entirely possible. It's not even fully rational. It's not fully understood. It's also occult. It's part of alternative medicine even today. Homeopathy is explicitly mentioned here in terms of, for instance, the homeopathic idea of giving extremely small doses of medicine as opposed to more active ones, and other lifestyle choices. Those are all in the addendum as well. Most of it, though, has to do with his experiments, the authors, that is, rather the translator of the initial document, with him and his wife, who is supposedly sensitive to these things. And they conducted a series of experiments, and it gives basically what happened. Well, she was able to identify all the metals that I had under the cups. She was able to find a spring of water at our neighbor's property. It's actually fascinating. It's a little bit of medical history as well. So this is definitely a highly recommended work. I'd class it most readily in the herbal category just because of the addendum's content being more towards that side. But really, it's a little bit of everything. It's a very strange work as well. And it was poorly written to the extent that there were a lot of spelling errors. And I've noticed a lot of these shorter works were written by lay people who had them privately published, often for a limited audience. Oftentimes, they never hired an editor, and oftentimes they weren't fully literate. And so it's not just archaicism within the spelling, like labor with a U, even though it's an American offshoot text or something. I mean more like a word is simply spelled wrong, like there's a typographical error of some kind, or a grammatical error that's obvious and stands out. These were quite common in some of these works, so it took a little bit longer to work through this. It was a good work, though. I enjoyed reading it as well as editing it, to tell the truth. So again, link in the description of my edition of this work on Amazon, second and third links to my books, blogs. If you're interested in sort of the history of medicine stuff, I think you'd like this best, or anything regarding mesmerism, hypnotism, because the first part of the text, the translated part by Baratel, that's basically what it's about. That's about all. Peace out.